Kansas is being linked to Kerem Konan, an international center from Turkey. What would he bring to the table for KU? How would he fit in if they could actually make one of these international signees work?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find that, again, anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're talking Kerem Konan, who is a forward 4-5 man, I guess you could say, former wing from Turkey, who's playing for one of the best clubs in the Turkish basketball league, which is one of the best basketball leagues in the world. And as Kansas continues to look for backup big, as Kansas continues to look for impact talent, as Kansas continues to look internationally, he becomes the next latest name kind of linked with KU that we're going to dive into how he plays overall and how he would possibly fit in with KU. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Okay, so Kerem Konan, I believe that is the way of pronouncing it. He is a 20-year-old forward, though he will be 21 years old by the time the season starts because he turns 21 in October. So basically a 21-year-old, which I'd imagine that means that he could be like, I don't know, a sophomore or a junior. 2 or 3 years of collegiate eligibility would be my assumption with how that would work. He's from Turkey, and he's playing for one of the best teams in the Turkish basketball league. So he began his professional career at the age of 17 in the 2021-22 season, playing with Besiktas Kripiks and also Tofis, the U18 team there, which I don't know if that was a loan out to the Belgrade League or what, but he's been with Besiktas Kripiks, whatever it is, as part of the Turkish League to some standpoint ever since then for really the last 4 seasons. And he started his career, if you look at his real GM page, it lists him at 6'6" tall and is a small forward. However, if you look at some of the more recent sites, some of the more recent placings, or have his more recent measurements, he's now 6'9", and he is now more of a power forward center type. He's more of a 4-5 man. I guess you could say, okay, if he was a small forward at one point, then maybe you could play him 3 through 5. Well, I guess theoretically that's true. After watching some of the tape and diving into this guy and looking at maybe a lack of three-point shooting or dribbling much, like that's probably not an opportunity. He's a 4 or 5. And I think more realistically, more ideally in the college game for KU, I think he would be mostly a 5 that you could play maybe a little bit at the 4. But we'll get into that as part of some of this stuff. But again, 6'9" overall now is his height. So if you were hoping, okay, hey, if Kansas lands a Bryce Tiller or one of these other guys, like they get a 7-footer in there, right? Well, seems like maybe Kansas is going to steer into more of having the, under 7-foot centers if that would be the case, and they would bring him on. Definitely, though, seems to fit the billing of, in the case of like Bryson Tiller, even though he's 6'10", he has like a 7'2" wingspan. Flory Bidunga, like 6'8", 6'9", but he has like a 7'2" wingspan. And that kind of seems to fit the billing of Konan. I don't have an official wingspan measurement. I haven't seen one anywhere. But if you watch some of the film, especially if you see some of the block shots that he has, he looks like somebody who has a plus wingspan. I would venture to guess it's at least a 7-foot wingspan. That is a total guess. I have no idea, but it looks like it's at the very least a plus wingspan. So you go back to the beginning of his career at the professional level, 8 games played in his first professional season, which again, he's splitting time between the Turkish league and the league in Belgrade, which is obviously a much worse league. Then his second year, he plays 9 games, and he's splitting time between the junior league and the ABA and the Turkish league again. Really starts to ingrain himself, I guess, with the senior team in his 19-year-old season, which was the 2023 to 2024 season with Besiktas Kripiks. And between all the competitions they played in, which, again, ESPN released an article of the top, I think it was 12 leagues around the world outside the NBA. The EuroLeague was number 1, which is an amalgamation of all the best teams in the league, so that makes sense. But number 2 was Spain, number 3 was Turkey. So it is one of the very best leagues in the world. And between all the competitions they played in, which were the Turkish League, they played in the Euro Cup, they played in the Super Cup, the Turkish Cup, they have all these different things they're playing for, right? 61 games played in the 2023 to 2024 season as a 19-year-old. He played 14.1 minutes per game. He averaged 4 points, 3.1 rebounds per game, 0.5 assists, 0.5 steals, 0.3 blocks, 0.6 turnovers per game. He shot 57.2% from the field. He shot 32.3% from three, and he shot 48% at the foul line. Now, obviously, the three-point shooting gets you a little excited, like, 32. It was 10 of 31, so it wasn't a ton of numbers. Free throw shooting does not get you excited, going 31 of 65. If we look at some of the more advanced numbers for what he put together, I only have the numbers for the actual Turkish League and the Euro Cup. This is over from 3steps Basket, but if you look at Konan's numbers in the Turkish League, that 19-year-old season, he was in the 82nd percentile for effective field goal percentage, 73rd percentile in true shooting percentage. His O rating was really good, 115.7, and his overall net rating was plus 12.5. That was in the 50th percentile, so about league average there, which, considering he was a 19-year-old in a professional league, that's pretty good. Only in the 15th percentile in assist rate. So, not huge numbers there, but he's also a big man, so that makes a little bit of sense. If you look at their mixed defensive rating, mixed team defense, he was in the 88th percentile. So by that one metric, he looked good on 3-step basket. He was in the 82nd percentile for rebounds per game, 76th percentile in O rebound rate, 86th percentile in D rebound rate. So he's a very good rebounder that year, and he wasn't somebody with high usage. You look at his performance in the Euro Cup that year, and just kind of more of the same, like above average effective field goal percentage. The net rating was actually negative for that one. The defense, though, rated out well. The rebounding rated out well. Then you go to this past season, right? That again, all of his 20 or 19-year-old season. This past season, so the 2024 to 2025 season for Konan, he's again playing with Besiktas Krepix, and again, through all those competitions, 52 games played, 12 minutes per game, 3.1 points, 2.7 rebounds, 0.6 assists, 0.3 steals, 0.4 blocks, 0.4 turnovers. But the field goal percentage goes way down, 49.1% from the field, 18.2% from three-point range, and 62.5% from the free throw line. So at the very least, the free throw shooting went up. The three-point shooting went way down. He only attempted 11 of them. He went 2 for 11 from three-point range this past season through all their competitions that they were playing in. Now, one possible, reason why this could be the case, and this is part of the reason why I don't know that he's suited to play as much the 4. I think you want him playing more the 5. One of the big differences on the Besiktas Kripix roster this year compared to the year before, when Konan shot better from the field, is that maybe there was a little bit more spacing that year, because I'm looking at the roster this year, and one of the big men that played, he was a center who played 15 minutes per game, was just ahead of him in minutes per game. But there were times where they were playing next to each other, is Uros Plavsic. And I don't know if you remember Uros Plavsic. He was a big man center for Tennessee, who is probably more known for just his physical defense and borderline screens and stuff like that, and borderline just physical play overall than anything else. And so he comes into the team, and I think that hurt the spacing for Konan. And you look at Konan's shot chart, he's not really taken many shots outside of the paint. Like if I look at this year, in the Turkish League only play, he made 0 shots in the mid-range. He was 2 for 4 from one corner from 3, but the majority of his shots came inside the paint. This is according to 3-step basket. If I look at his time in the Euro Cup this season, it's more of the same. Most of his shots are at the basket. He made 0 mid-range shots. He attempted a couple threes, but he didn't make any. So again, that's the 3stepbasket.com. So I don't know if that has all the data in there, but that's pretty telling. This is a guy who plays inside for the majority of his game. A little similar to if you were to play him next to Flory, it would have 2 guys who have to fully operate inside the paint. And I'm not sure how much that works. So I think you want him mostly as a 5. Now, you look at the stats this season and what he put up. During Turkish League play, he wound up 49th percentile in effective field goal percentage, so about average there, but considering he's a big, you'd like that to be better. That said, again, if we're talking about possible reason why, maybe it was the lack of spacing. He was a +6 net rating, so that's solid. His Rebounding, his defensive numbers, I guess, was in the 56th percentile. His rebounding numbers, again, 88th percentile offensive rebound rate, 74th percentile for defensive rebound rate. So I think that kind of tells a little bit of a tale of his game and what he brings to the table. But what do the highlights show? How would he fit in with KU? We'll get to all those next on Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the NBA playoffs, the intensity, the buzzer beaters, the fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmospheres you should try experiencing live. And if you live in one of the areas for, it's perfect in the Midwest for the NBA Finals, matchups are already delivering. And maybe it's the NHL Stanley Cup Finals. Maybe it's even just baseball, especially as we get closer to the postseason when things really ramp up. Well, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. Great, too, as we're looking for the upcoming fall season with college football. Maybe you're just looking to go to a game or two during the year, and maybe you're going to decide the day of based on, is the weather nice? Like, what are the other games on? Do I want to go to this game or that? Or maybe you're going to a road game for your team. Well, boom, Game Time will help you out with that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed with Game Time. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget you make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. Okay, Kerem Konan went over some of the numbers, basically kind of a recap there. Didn't shoot super well from two or at the rim basically this season. I think part of that was because of the lack of spacing. He's somebody who can shoot a three here or there, but, not really going to make them super high often. Not a great free throw percentage. Great rebounder so far, and somebody who can, get the occasional shot block. It's interesting. I've seen some people be like, he's definitely a better shot blocker than if they would have brought on Bryce Tiller. And if you look at the numbers, they're actually pretty similar in how many blocks per game they're getting. Now, if you look at the highlights, the shot blocks that Konan gets are a lot more exciting in how he does them. But what about what those highlights showed? So I would just say he seems like somebody who is maybe the best way I could put this is he's a fearless, fighting, mobile player. Might be a best way of kind of describing that in a short way. So he cuts well off the ball. He can receive alley-oops pretty well. Doesn't always dunk them. Sometimes they're laid in, right? I think from a vertical standpoint, from a vertical jumping standpoint, I would say that if he's in a standstill or doesn't have a big run-up, he might be below average jumper. But if he does get a run-up, if he does get a running start, if he does get to jump off 2 feet, maybe after a couple steps, he's a good jumper. So maybe you just average that out and say for his position, he's just like a fine jumper. He's just like an average jumper. But athleticism is more than just jumping, and I think he also can make up for that a little bit with his wingspan. I think he's a mobile player at the very least. Now, I've seen some highlights of him being switched onto a guard and him being able to stay with it. I've seen other highlights where he's been switched onto a guard and the guard is blown by him. And then I've seen other highlights where he switched onto a guard and the guard got the edge on him and seemed like was going to blow by him. But then because of his fight and hustle and length, he was able to kind of close the gap and then pin a block off the backboard. So I've seen it kind of all over there. You really, I think, see the mobility on the offensive end of the floor is where I saw it, right? On those cuts. You see it in the transition game on the offensive end where the combination of him running hard in transition with having good fluidity and mobility, from that standpoint, he does look like more of a 4. And so if you're playing him at the 5, you're getting even more of that speed advantage by kind of doing so. I think you see that in pick and roll. I was not really impressed with the screens he set. Didn't really seem like he's setting very good screens, and that might rub Bill Self the wrong way, but he was still, even without doing that, he was a really good threat as a roll man in pick and roll. He was still really somebody who was able to score well in pick and roll because of kind of the combination of the mobility, fluidity, and a little bit of his finesse game. I would say that, again, you go back to the strong motor part of this, like seems to have a very strong motor, seems to fight very hard for rebounds. The stats would obviously back that up. Seems to fight really hard for offensive rebounds. I think the best compliment I could give in that way is that if I was the opposing, 4 or 5 man that was in charge of guarding Konan in a given game where I knew I was going to have to box him out on the defensive end every game, I would be a little like, I'd be like, ah, crap, not this matchup. He would be one of those guys who would bother you. He would be one of those guys who was like, you can never not box him out, or he's going to get the offensive rebound on the one time you don't do it. It's kind of that endless hustle type of thing. And so that is a really good skill that he has. I would say, some of the assists per game numbers aren't huge or anything like that, but you see some interesting passes on some of the highlights that show some interesting, passing vision, IQ, and creativity with his passing game. Like I said, the block numbers aren't huge, like 0.4 blocks per game in 12 minutes per game. I mean, that equals out if you were playing 30 minutes per game, he'd be getting 1 block per game. So like that's fine block numbers, especially for a 4-man, right? Those are solid block numbers, especially at a pro level. It's not, Jeff Withy or anything like that, but the blocks that he does have, they are fun to watch. I recommend go and watch the highlights on some of those blocks. They are pins off the backboard. They are chase down blocks in transition where he's hustling back to get a guy. They are really fun blocks that I think show the combination of length, mobility to catch up to some of these plays, and hustle to just have a want to get back on defense and make some of these blocks. And so I do think if you watch some of the highlights, like you'll see on some of the highlights, like, oh, here's a post-up score for him, or here's a spot-up shot where he made a 3. I think overall, though, the stats would kind of tell you for the bigger sample size, both those things are still a work in progress. I guess it is nice to show that he theoretically can and that he has shown it on tape, especially against professional league, but they're not things that I would count on either as being, strengths to this point in time. So how exactly would he fit in with all of that into KU? Well, again, I think you could theoretically play him 4-5. If I was saying you could play Flory at the 4 with Desare at the 5, I mean, Desare wasn't shooting, threes at all. So the fact that Konan, isn't shooting them reliably or shooting mid-range shots, like I guess theoretically you could get away with that, and you just have an awesome rebounding front court that, yeah, you probably could play, a handful of minutes of Konan next to Flory, and maybe a handful of minutes of Konan next to Bryson Tiller, where, one's the 4 and one's the 5, and that could be a fun lineup there with what you're doing in that regard. But I think Konan also represents somebody who would be able to come in and give you backup big minutes, right? He's going to be 21 in October, so he's going to be a little bit more experienced than bringing in, if you're reclassified a freshman or bringing in a young player like that, right? He's playing at a high-level professional league where he knows what it's like to come in and play a specific role on a team and be a role player. And for those reasons, it makes it a good fit. The idea that it almost feels like more and more. And I don't know who the second leading point per game guy is going to be on this KU team, right? I think the odds on favorite for the leader would be Darryn Peterson. It almost feels like at this point, like Kansas is basically saying it. And it's interesting because I say this, and Bryson Tiller is like a skilled big man who can definitely score in a lot of different ways. But it seems like if you would be going for a Konan, you would basically be saying, yeah, the majority of our center minutes between Flory and Konan are going to be guys that we're just, we don't have to run a play for them, right? Sure, there's going to be plays where they catch lobs and they seal off their guy and get an easy bucket, or they get a drop-off dunk. But for the most part, those guys are going to be getting points in the flow of the offense. They're going to be really good rebounders. They're going to help us block shots. They're going to be mobile to where we can switch in a lot of different ways, and we can be a very versatile defense. That would be a very fun way of playing. And I'm not saying Konan is Flory. Like Flory is, I think, an even another level of, athletic and jumper and some other things, but and potential and stuff, but it would allow you to play in similar ways regardless of which one is out there, which I think is would certainly be a benefit to a lot of the players in not having to change up your styles when it's one guy versus the other, right? I think that would probably be a benefit to KU. So like if I was comparing Konan to Bryce Desare, like I would definitely prefer Bryce Desare, but like it seems like that's just not going to happen for KU from an eligibility standpoint. And so if that is the case, okay, who's next guy up on the list? Well, it seems like Konan would be a decent fallback option for KU to go to. I wouldn't be quite as far as with Desare to be like, okay, you try to find this guy 20 minutes, even if it means playing too big basketball. If this is more of, okay, he's playing 10, 12 minutes per game, that makes sense to me, right? Where it's like, Again, you could play 4-5 basketball, but it wouldn't be as much of something where I'd be like, yeah, they should do it to get this guy minutes, as I think you would need to if it was the other way around. But still, I think this would be a good addition for KU. I don't think it would be the game-changing, huge impact one that KU probably needs, but I don't know if that's out there at this point in time, as we discussed on previous episodes. So I think at this point, you are just going to kind of have to fill out your roster with role players and hope those role players can, fit as best as possible. And that Darryn Peterson is that mega stud, and Flory does take that leap, and maybe another player takes that leap, right? Maybe it's Marco Jackson. Maybe it's one of the transfers who takes a leap forward in addition to coming on to KU. And you're going to kind of have to hope for that internal growth. But you know what? I know we've kind of lost sight of that. A lot of past years in Bill Self's time at KU, they've had some players take pretty big jumps and have that internal growth. So as long as you can have that, it can be okay. But yeah, Kerem Konan, I'd say he's a take. I'd say it'd be a solid addition for KU. All right, I want to talk about a Big 12 basketball blunder from Brett Yormark and a lot of B's, I guess, as we continue on, by not matching up KU and BYU twice. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. I think this was a big mess up by Brett Yormark and the Big 12 office. And I say Brett Yormark because he's the commissioner of the Big 12. I don't know how much he has a hand in the Big 12 schedule, but clearly Brett Yormark cares a lot about basketball and has wanted to expand the reach of basketball and college basketball in the Big 12 and done some different things there. And he is kind of a basketball guy with some previous ties to the Brooklyn Nets and Jay-Z and those sort of things, right? And I have a hard time believing that, why? I guess I just don't understand. So this was from John Rothstein earlier. It said, source: Kansas will play Arizona, Iowa State, and in-state rival Kansas State twice in Big 12 play during the 2025 to 26 season. Makes sense that you would do Kansas State, being your in-state opponent. I mean, Iowa State makes sense as well because that one's I guess regionally close and stuff. The Arizona one, why not just make it BYU this year? I get it from a standpoint of, okay, Arizona is one of the other big brands now in the Big 12, and Kansas is obviously the big brand in the Big 12, so you want to match those up. But this is not the year to do that. BYU and Kansas gives you an opportunity to match up the number 1 and number 2 recruits in the country as many times as possible. And you're only going to do it one time now. You're only going to have one of those teams play at home. I mean, the opportunity for you to do it twice and then hope that they meet in the conference tournament as well, that's going to draw national eyeballs, especially when you're not just talking about number 1 versus number 2 recruit. You're talking about number 1 versus number 2 recruit in a class that is supposed to be very good at the top. And then on top of it, in the previous matchups that we've seen between AJ Dybantsa, who's now going to BYU, and Darryn Peterson, who's obviously at Kansas, both of them have exploded for some awesome performances. Dybantsa had 50 points. Peterson had 60 points in the last time they met. It has been awesome. So why would you not schedule that twice? That is a huge gaffe by the Big 12. That is a huge mistake not to schedule that game twice if you're Brett Yormark and the Big 12 office. I mean, in my opinion, that would have been the biggest most marquee from just right. Maybe it won't matter as much in terms of how it impacts the college basketball regular season, right? You could argue, okay, this team playing that team will matter more, yada, yada, yada. Although BYU's supposed to be really good this year, and Kansas at the very least should be top 25. From just a neutral fan, from getting the non-college basketball fan to watch, from getting college basketball fans of other schools to just be interested in a game and see some talent, that would be as marquee of a matchup as you could have anytime. So why would you not do that twice? I think that's a big flub by the Big 12. And it's honestly something that I just kind of almost assumed that it was just going to happen because it made too much sense to happen. And that's been, I don't know, I would say a common gripe of mine with the current office in the Big 12 that I think Brett Yormark does a lot of really good stuff and is aggressive and has been very helpful for the Big 12 with realignment and, staying on the front end of things and having a good vision and stuff. But there are also times where it's just either, you missed a big opportunity there, or a lot of times where it's just the idea goes too far. And it's why are we, obviously the game didn't end up happening, but it's why are we playing a basketball game in Mexico with Houston and Kansas? And it's you flip to that again, the game didn't end up happening. It got moved away, but it's so you're going to focus on playing a game in Mexico between Kansas and Houston, but then you're not going to focus on the easiest thing to focus on, which would be playing the number 1 versus number 2 recruit in the country twice this season. Like, it's almost like you're jumping to the, you're going to college, and instead of enrolling in, communications 101, you're like, okay, the first class I'm taking, communications 601. I'm ready for the graduate level class. You know what I mean? It's like, can we focus on the basics? We can have the graduate level stuff in there too, but we got to do the fundamentals. We got to do the basics too. I don't know. Just a small gripe of mine. But anyway, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time for another edition of LOJ.